Um, the real Snow Queen situation versus the fantasy fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, as well as the several different versions produced by different directors over the years, including David Wu. First of all, Hans Christian Andersen wrote The Snow Queen. It was one of his longest fairy tales. I believe, I might be wrong on the years, but let's just say 1850 era, around there. And the original edition involved a little boy and a little girl. The little boy's name was Kay, or Kai. If you were Swedish or Norwegian, it would be Kai, K-A-I. If you were English, you would probably be known as Kay. And Gerda. Now, in the story from Hans Christian Andersen, one of the most obvious things that stands out to my mind is that the Snow Queen herself really was not really much of a character per se. She was kind of like, she was just the woman of the north. She was the cold winter season, and she adopted Kay. Actually, Kay, to be honest with you, in the original, was just looking for a joyride until he hitched his sled up to her sleigh and wanted a free ride. So babe, she thought he was kind of cute as a little boy, and so she wanted to have a son of her own, a stepson, but she didn't want to go through the appropriate channels of going through the orphanage and adopting a child, so she kind of just took Kay for herself. And that is why we have this, that's how she turned into a villain. She did it wrong, folks. She did it wrong. She took a child away from his home and his loving little female playmate, which is Gerda and her family. And, but she did that because she was lonely. She had nothing. Absolutely nothing. She had no kids. She had no sex life. She had no social life. She was a workaholic for all intents and purposes. And all her life, because she lives in such a cold, inhospitable area, she saw the world as a cold place, and that where she thought she was above the law. She was doing it out of desperation. Now, I've been there, but I'll get to that in a second. Now, in another version, which is a Russian story, I think it was 1966. Again, the Snow Queen came to Gerda and Kay's home. Kay was a little foster child whose parents had passed on, and Gerda's family took him in as their own son. And grandmother loved her little Gerda and her little Kay very much. They were, in this case, they were about 70 years old in the story. And for some reason, the Snow Queen came after some evil guy who was sort of her agent of cold, if you will. I don't know his name, but let's put it this way: he was an evil man, and he wanted to buy the flowers, the roses that were given by Hans Christian Andersen to Gerda and Kay. Not because he loved them, because he despised them, so he could destroy them. So again, now we have bribery and corruption involved in the story. Again, this is not what originally Hans Christian Andersen intended. So therefore, again, this is where the producers have again decided to come up with a new story based on the tale, but not the original source. Then we can get we've seen a couple of editions, the same thing with the BBC's version of the Snow Queen. Plus, there's also another variation from Fairy Tale Theater by MicheleMarieDalene Duvall's Fairy Tale Theater. That one was cool. I liked that one, but it was, again, kind of edited down. It really was kind of cute though, so I really thought it was kind of fun. Whereas Kay only had to solve a puzzle and then he could go home. And the Snow Queen was not a villain. She was just kind of just wanted him to solve a puzzle. Not really practical, but you know, that's just the way a lot of stories are sometimes. 2002, David Wu version, he tried to bring the story of the Snow Queen to a more contemporary audience, but he discussed a lot of things in there I would not want to show any child, because the fact is, number one, we're talking about topics of suicide. We're talking about you know, evil behavior. We're talking about egomaniacs who have desire to destroy and control. Boy, that sounds real old, don't it? Oh, okay, so in other words, what'd you do? You turned the Snow Queen story into something that every single person who ever watched the stock market could see, all the corporate takeovers and all the corruption and crime in the world. But again, you got the abduction of the Snow Queen. Here, she basically woos or seduces over Kai, which in this case is now about 19 years old. 17, I think 19 years old. So therefore, now I get seduction, and oh, I don't know, that's not me either. So let's go through that, okay? Now, obviously, I don't seduce anybody, okay? Now we'll get to the real me. The real me is a person who believes in love and compassion and decency and dedication. Like the original Snow Queen, I am a loner. I do not necessarily do well with groups of people because of the fact that I have Asperger's. And for me, I rather spend more time alone instead of being involved with thousands of people or hundreds or even 10, 20 people. I have very few friends because I tend to stay to myself. And the very few friends I have really don't understand why I value being the Snow Queen so much. I really wish I could explain it to you. I can't. I really wish I could. But the problem is as we get into the real story, we start to see that there's a lot more going on here. The Snow Queen position is a position that's very special to me. There's a lot of magic. And I talked about briefly in videos about how we have to involve sorcery and the study of the weather, meteorology, sorcery, sciences. That's true. That's something that none of these stories talk about. Is exactly what does the Snow Queen really do. David Wu's version mentions that she went earlier in autumn to prepare the Alps to remind people that winter was coming by putting snow on the Alps. But that's all she mentioned. In the original, she was said to do the same thing, but that doesn't really explain much of what she does. My entire area is the North American continent, and that's a lot of area to watch. The original story was she was supposed to be the Snow Queen of the whole world. Fat chance. Ursula technically she could be the Snow Queen of the whole world, but that's a lot of territory to cover. As I said, Mother Asna's plans is to have 3 Snow Queens or Snow Stewards for winter for the northern and 4 for the southern. So right now, the southern climates are going to be entering their summer phase and in the southern hemisphere. So which that means if the Snow Queen was based in, say, the southern hemisphere, she would already have established her winter home here in the northern hemisphere to prepare winter work. And then again, at the end of her winter season here, probably about, you know, maybe late spring, she would prepare to transverse and go back. Now I get lost. By summer, she probably would get ready to prepare for her northern summer here. She would go down south, the southern hemisphere to do her winter down there. So that means that